Welcome back to hour number 2. It's Wednesday, and every Wednesday, Tobago Talks, and when Tobago Talk, we listen. We welcome Bradon Roberts, the tutor representative for Tobago. He joins me on the Zoom line. Mr. Roberts, great to see you. Compliments of the season, and good morning.
Morning, compliments of the season to you and your team as well, and good morning to the viewers.
Of course, thank you for the time. You know, when last we spoke on the program, you mentioned, yes, there are indeed fights, disruptions in Tobago. Many would have, some were in doubt. But videos recently that went viral confirmed the horror that you mentioned in the last conversation. Coming out of that, what's the position with tutor, what's tutor's position on such incidents, and more so what the Ministry of Education recently put forward as a mandate for both, I would imagine, Trinidad and Tobago, with students who are expelled. We didn't hear so much about suspension, but those who are expelled, they'll be given, as they say, boot camp, milat, and such. What's your position on, firstly, the situation there in Tobago, and then as we look towards the holistic perspective from the ministry? Let's start first with Tobago.
Right, well, Mr. Williams, they aren't addressing school-based violence, that's the concerning thing. We are yet to have measures in place to address school-based violence. And to just do a little cleanup, because what happened yesterday is that a media outlet would have pinched piece of my interview and give it a totally different focus, as if milat is the topic of discussion. Now, milat may or may not be a good program. It has nothing to do with preventing school-based violence. So it's not that Tobago tutor is against milat. If we are discussing school-based violence, milat in its current form does not fit into the conversation. We need to have systems in place that will prevent our children from getting to this level. It's similarly in general society. Building more prison cells don't say you're going to have a hold on crime. We need to address the social ills. Similarly, we need to address the deficiencies in the education system. So I would really want us to focus on how we're going to really address this school-based violence, because really and truly there's a fanfare about milat, and we're not treating with school-based violence as we ought to. So I would hope that the conversation really gets it. So I'm grateful for the work that the media outlet did in terms of bringing attention to the fact that school-based violence is still not being addressed in Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, let me ask you, what conversation is tutor having with the Division of Education on the said subject of school violence? What's the recommendations, what you all are seeing behind the closed doors?
Right. Now, there are some things that need to happen. Our school system, we do not have the requisite number of teachers in all of our schools, especially the technical and vocational education and training, the TVET, those hands-on, the skilled subjects and so on. We do not have the requisite number of teachers in those areas. So management of the school in one case, and providing those hands-on, the skills training for our students, it's lacking in many of our schools in both Trinidad and Tobago. We have a student support services division that is overworked and under-resourced. So instead of a guidance officer, for example, having 6 or 7 students to really give some attention to, they are having 6 or 7 schools. So I don't know what serious intervention the student support services division could really have in the moral education and ensuring that our students are being conformed to what we want them to be. So if we don't address those 2 critical areas, we're going to continue to have schools that are short-staffed, and the principal would magically have a handle of all areas of a school when they don't have the requisite number of the resources.
Let me ask you, do you think it's time to hold some parents accountable for what happens in the school? Because again, I mean, Mr. Roberts, we had school fights in our school day. We look like, we were on the same generation. I had some, well, I didn't fight personally because I didn't want to really have to go through that conversation with my mom, and I mean, back then was corporal punishment, so I was very afraid of licks. I didn't want to go through that, so I kind of held my ground. But for those who went down that road back in the day, I remember parents used to have to come in school, and parents will sometimes discipline their children. It will be embarrassing for the student. That's not, well, it doesn't seem to be the case in this particular dispensation. So are parents to be held accountable, do you think? We should start having that conversation?
Well, definitely, parents need to be held accountable, but how do we go about doing such? Now, we have, I believe, us from 2013 coming forward, we would have had all sorts of children rights that we copy and paste from foreign entities like we see what America is doing with the children rights. You even as a parent, you going into a school and beat your child, if you damage that child, you as the parent would have questions to answer to, So it's not that you can discipline into the punishment side of discipline as you used to long ago. Um, Education is needed even for our parents, but we are having cohorts of persons leaving the education system, not being to that standard that they ought to be, and also making children. So we at the school level, we need to be given the opportunity to start making that change. So yes, we need to hold parents accountable, but how do we go about doing such? Is it that we're going to create laws where parents will be fined? And then we talk about the economy where parents are not able to afford. So are we going to lock up some of our parents and leave our children outside? How do we go about holding parents accountable?
But the parents will find, when you hurt someone in the pocket, there is a change in behavior, Mr. Roberts. The reality is, if parents know fully well, and again, I'm not suggesting this should be the solution, but as you mentioned, fine. Okay, let's say there is a fine in place if a student or a child fights. That child, based on the parents' conversation of letting the child know, listen, we don't have them resources. Believe you me, I think children will think twice, because a parent will deal with it a bit different if they are indeed impacted in the pocket. That's just probably...
I do share that it may really be effective, but what about the parent who would then not be able to afford? What do you do to that parent?
Well, the parent now will have to have a serious conversation. This parent now who can't afford will definitely, because let's be real, I mean, I'm not suggesting that only one type of child coming from a particular bracket will fight. All children fight. But children who come from a particular bracket, who understands the struggle, if the parent puts it to them in a real way, I think they might think twice. They might. You never know. Children will be children, but again, that's just, as we just thinking out the box, obviously, with some solutions, because I really wonder if parents need to be held more accountable. There are parents who go and defend their children too, Mr. Roberts, in their nonsense.
I know they go out and they want to fight the teachers too, so we do know of such. So that is why, in terms of my suggestions going forward, is more preventative.
Education.
We need yes, the education and the moral education mainly, because we took the church out of schools to a significant extent. So we don't even have that spiritual and moral education as we ought to have it, even to our children. Our children easily have access to the Trinidad music, the vulgarity in the soca, the dancehall, the bad boy thing, and there's very little opportunity unless a parent is able to carry their child to church to get that kind of spiritual and moral education. So we need to have systems put in place. And I could give you at least three suggestions I believe that the ministry and the division need to really work towards.
Go right ahead. Name that.
Right. So outside of resourcing the schools into the teachers and the TVET and so on, when I was in Scarborough Secondary School, we had the head boy and we had two prefects that would be assigned to the lower classes. So the fifth formers and the sixth formers would come to the first form, the second form, third form, and you had that kind of body system where the bigger students would have a rapport with the smaller ones, and they help to groom the kind of behavior that we want to have. We need to have that kind of system be enriched. We also need to have the student council. When I was at Black Rock Government, as the Standard 5, we had, instead of having the elections to see who voting for PADEB at UNC and all those kind of things, we had an election to put in a student council. We had a student in charge of academic. We had an academic officer, a sport officer, a discipline officer. This cohort was independent to the school, so they could ask the principal for a meeting. At the lines, they would acknowledge students who are most improved, and they give those kind of tokens. So there are things that we can do to give children that level of leadership training. So it's not only conforming the ones who are not doing so well, you are giving those persons the opportunity to become leaders within your school. Their reporting skills and so on could be
empowerment, basically empowerment. Let them dream or work towards something, or at least the students looking on at these. I guess the students who are put into this particular role, you could know. Yes, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. And if you look at the excitement that these children have being on camera, like they have no fear, they want their attention. So we could give them avenues to have positive attention. The child who is not doing so well in education, in its current form, in the academics, would not have that opportunity to be positively celebrated, so they will get it negatively. If we don't create the avenues for them to be praised, so even the TVET, as I mentioned, they need the hands-on that they may be better at. We need to give them those opportunities.
But let me ask you, in real time, for the children who reject all of that, because, again, great suggestions, but there are some children really based on whether environment, whether they're trying to be hardcore, whether it's the subculture, as you mentioned, with the music and what's around them, they reject all that. Do you think MILAT, as suggested by the minister, could be a great institution that can instill discipline on a child who is clearly on the edge?
Yeah, but that's after the fact, Mr. Williams. And yes, it really can be a good program. So it's not that I'm a tutor, it's against MILAT. But just as WASA will do, they will have to turn off the tap before they fix the pipe. So you can't have the system brewing where children are having these deviant behaviors and then just create a program. And let's examine MILAT. It's not for persons under 16 years of age currently. It doesn't cater for girls. And we have girls dominating the media throughout this calendar year. MILAT may be a good initiative, but if you're discussing school-based violence or addressing school-based violence, MILAT really does not fit into the conversation at all.
Yeah. What does the fights in Tobago do to the community? I know it's more close-knit. It's obviously a place where somebody might know someone, they might know the family, they might know a cousin. What does it do to the school and by extension, the community?
Well, it's devastating to all persons with that interest, because let's look at the fight at Signal Hill. That student would be looking to the parents really, to see what they do, and would look at the school and the community to see what really comes out of this, because this would have long-lasting effects on that particular child. That child may realize, well, it's every man for themselves now, because if all these students can beat up on me and nothing comes out, I would really need to take matters into my own hands going forward. So as a parent, you're really concerned as to the psychological effects on the child that's affected. And there are also persons who learn from other people's experience. So as an onlooker, you may tell yourself as well, as a child, I really need to arm myself or put myself in a position to defend should such thing happen to me. So there are a lot of parents who are concerned and very cautious with sending their children to particular schools, and they talk to them every morning to stay out of these incidents, but sometimes it comes to you. So there is that level of comfort that persons would have, that they should have, in sending their children to school.
Again, we find ourselves in a very interesting place. I mean, as mentioned before, and I don't want to really cast any aspersions or put a particular projection on the now generation. School fights, it's always been part of the mix. It's just now, obviously, with the advent of cell phones, it's being captured, and social media, where people are throwing talk and obviously that kind of interaction in that space. So it's some of the problems they're dealing with. We didn't have to go through that, Mr. Roberts. I mean, that's the reality. And I think, as you rightfully said, education for the parents, for the students, major counseling, and probably some kind of reconciliation. Do you suggest, or is there any kind of talk of having students or schools that might have issues to just meet and, because let's be real, violence is always when conversations stop. People tend to go into blows when the talking stop. Could we get these students or people who might have issues with each other in the school to have just conversations?
Right. So, and I'm grateful that you brought that up. I've got one significant point. You see, if we have in the schools to get a conversation, the conversation has to be about something. And too many of our schools don't have a set program, a set focus. So even like Tobago, where the secretary discussed preparing this Tobago-centric curriculum, Trinidad and Tobago really need a reform by which schools have a program that each child understands how they fit into this program. The parents, the business sector understand, because we want businesses to adopt a school, because finances, it's not infinite. We would want the support of our business sector, but if you're going to sell a package, you have to really have something there for persons to want to invest in. So there needs to be something for a conversation to be centered around. If we have a tourism focus or agri focus where these students who are not so academically inclined could really have an avenue in the agriculture, an avenue in the sports, in the PE and so on, despite the challenges with the academics. we can get a holistic approach to education that we need at this time, which could be the focus. So instead of having persons come to a table to discuss the violence, these same persons can be at a table discussing the positive things that schools should be about. So yes, there needs to be the conversation, and the ministry, just as a division, need to lead these kinds of a thing. I think this idea of politics and portraying representation and not really getting down to the actionables. We are having all these stakeholder meetings, and it's just everybody getting a chance to say their piece, and we close off. We're not fleshing out and getting down to the actionables where we are all working on something. You know,
as they say,
it's like the Milat, it's a fanfare really.
As they say, the real nitty-gritty. Mr. Roberts, I want to thank you as always. You know, always on point, bringing some serious recommendations to the table, and hopefully when we talk in calendar year 2024, even before the end of the year, we must be hopeful, we must be optimistic that improvement will come. And thank you for the update, and keep it safe there across in sweet Tobago.
And thank you, Mr. Williams. Always a pleasure to be on the program.
Mr. Roberts there, touching base. Bradon Roberts, tutor representative out of Tobago, dealing with the school violence, talking about some recommendations, and bringing it to us in real time. Let's get ready for another important conversation this time around. It's dealing with the CSME. The CSME focal point. Up next, full details after the break.
I met a mister from Margarita, and he wanted